Hi everyone, I'm Michael Boriskin, the Artistic and Executive Director of Copland House, and I am at Rock Hill, which is Aaron Copland's longtime New York home, an award-winning creative center for American music, and a National Historic Landmark. And I am really so glad to welcome you all to Cultivated Spaces 3.0. This is the virtual version of our Cultivate Emerging Composers Institute, an annual week-long creative workshop and mentoring program for gifted composers at the initial stages of their professional careers. Each year, we invite 6 composers to participate at no cost to them. We commission each of the 6 to compose a brief chamber work, which becomes the basis of their work during an intensive week of rehearsals and work sessions with our Music from Copland House ensemble and Cultivate director, Derek Bermel. This year, for the first time since Cultivate 2019, all of those activities were back from pandemic shutdowns, except for our final public concert at which all of the 6 new works were premiered, which is why we are here virtually. We are presenting 6 programs in this series, streaming weekly and then available indefinitely thereafter, at which our Music from Copland House ensemble will be giving the virtual world premieres of these terrific new pieces. And this is the point where we here at Copland House thank all of our colleagues at I Care If You Listen. It has been wonderful partnering with them on this series for 3 years now. Today, we are featuring Elijah Daniel Smith and his new work, Sounds of a Fading Daylight. So I guess we're filming this at just the right time of day. Elijah's piece, which is colorful and wonderfully eerie, at times almost otherworldly sounding, is almost hypnotic. Elijah is going to say a few words about his piece, and then we're going to hear it performed by some of the artists of Music from Copland House. And after that, Elijah will return for a brief conversation with Derek. So please join us for all of the 6 programs in Cultivated Spaces 3.0. Tell your friends and colleagues to join us, but for now, we hope you'll enjoy.
Hi everyone, my name is Elijah Daniel Smith, and my piece is called Sounds of a Fading Daylight. This piece was inspired by the patterns of shadows that trees cast during sunset when the wind is sort of gently blowing through them. And growing up, the sunset would always come in directly through our living room window and through the trees outside, and the shadows and the light play on the walls always captivated and fascinated me. But this piece isn't so much concerned with capturing or representing this specific happening musically or creating, a one-to-one relationship between the visual phenomenon and sound, as much as it's sort of taking the idea of moving shadows and exploring what sorts of musical ideas can come out of that. And not so much exactly what it sound like, but if we were thinking about these things while writing, what happens? So that's the piece. Thank you to Copland House for putting all this together, and thank you to the amazing musicians in the ensemble for really breathing life into this idea. They did an amazing job, and it was a blast and a pleasure to work with them for a week. Hope you enjoy.
Hi, my name is Derek Bermel, and I'm the director of the Cultivate program at Copland House. I want to welcome Elijah Daniel Smith, and and thanks for that beautiful piece, which we just heard, "Sounds of Fading Daylight." Um, the title's very evocative. Do you want to say anything about that? I mean, I know titles are titles, but
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. This is one of the few pieces that I've written recently where I named it like the title actually has to do with the inspiration of the piece rather than just like giving it some random title after the fact that I think is applicable. Um, but the piece, the inspiration behind it was sort of, if the sun's setting on, a bunch of trees outside of an apartment or something, and the trees start casting these really interesting like layers of shadows as the breeze blows through them on, anything that the shadow falls on. And it was, that's always been something that I've loved even growing up. I just have these memories of trees outside and the sun shining in and sort of these nice little light shows on the walls. And so I sort of thought about what that would sound like and then decided that it sounded cooler if it was really slow, slower than any trees would actually move in any breezes, but just sort of as an auditory representation of a visual phenomenon. I thought it sounded better slow.
so it's interesting that you say that because how does one represent something visual in something sonic when, although actually, when you bring this up, it does feel like it's a visual thing that takes place through time because even the fading aspect of that gives it this motion that moves into time, which is our medium, which is easier than say a painting or something static.
Yeah. That's a tough question. I mean, I think the first thing I always ask myself when I'm inspired by some other non-musical thing is how important is it to me that a listener knows that this is supposed to be representing something. So for me in this one, it sort of felt like it was the inspiration behind the piece, but I wasn't super concerned with whether or not it was an accurate representation of something else, primarily because the way I feel about it is that even if it is an accurate representation of something else, if it doesn't sound good, then like, I'm not, then what's the point? So I sort of think of it as like, if it's something that someone can hear and is like, oh, I know what that is, then great. But if not, hopefully it's still a good piece of music that's enjoyable to listen to on its own.
Yeah, it has such a mood to me, and um, as many of your pieces do, it really, I mean, it utilizes also just to get into the nerdy nitty gritty, um, in the strings and the clarinet, and certainly that come out of the multiphonics, and then you've got a whole battery uh, of objects to go inside the piano to prepare it. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that and how you think about creating sound and how sound uh, how you construct that in your mind and then
Yeah.
kind of realize it in this way?
Yeah. I think in this piece, I'm definitely thinking of microtones as different gradations or shadings of like a single thing. So sort of thinking about it as when you have these shadows that are moving, it's all the same thing, but it's never quite still. It's never, when the breeze is blowing, at least it's never just sitting there static. And so the microtones are my way of sort of representing that subtle movement and motion. And then in the piano, I find that the sound of a piano has it's so particular, and for me at least when I hear it, it's like, oh, piano. And when I was writing this piece, it just felt like it was taking me out of the world of this piece. So putting all the things in the piano, I have uh, little cap erasers at the bottom, or in two notes in the bottom that produce some harmonics up top, and then I have plastic straws and then golf tees in between some of the strings. And the reason for both of them is that they sort of produce further distortions of the pitch because the plastic straw doesn't exert as much pressure, so it's a little bit out of tune, and then the golf tees exert a lot more pressure, so it's a lot more out of tune. So I'm sort of using those as ways to get some interesting sounds out of the piano that I felt were more suitable for this piece because it just felt like if there was a chord, all of a sudden I was like, oh, all right, well, let's
piano piece now. So
It is an odd ensemble, right? Because you have these I guess three sets of it's I mean one and two and one, and they're all quite different. So dealing with that orchestration means it sets. I guess might set you in a certain direction compositionally too.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, of course, the most famous piece with this instrumentation is Quartet for the End of Time, and I love that piece. And I think it was interesting thinking about it in that context because I don't think my piece really has all that much in common with the Messiaen, but sort
Well,
of,
actually, I think it has something in common with the first movement of the Messiaen because
yeah,
it creates a mood, and that's the one thing is like that first movement. It almost it has a fairly similar mood throughout, and not yours changes, but the changes are very subtle.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point. I think in a structural level, and an aesthetic level, I definitely think there are some similarities with the first movement of the Messiaen, especially given that. Um, Messiaen's using just these sort of lines that they start and they go and then they're done. And I think there's a lot that I think is similar in my piece in that there are sort of these momentary, chunks of music and they start and they go and then they're done. Um, and I think, from that standpoint, I definitely think there's a lot in common with the Messiaen, but at the same time, um, I think when I listen to the Messiaen, there are things in there that I think are a little more idiomatic for the instruments in the piece. And I like to avoid that as much as I can when writing, just because I find that, especially in an instrumentation like this that does have so many great pieces written for it, I want to try to get as far away from those pieces as possible. So just for my own sake, so that I'm not sitting there in my own mind comparing it like, oh, well, Messiaen did this, but so it's like, it's a different world now, despite the fact that it's the same medium.
Anxiety of influence, it's a terrible thing. But we all have it. And no, but your music really sounds like something new and different. And to me, when I hear it, I always hear, I hear so many things. I mean, I hear spectral music, I hear the blues, I hear, kind of, I hear some things from pop music even, that kind of, and do you, um, is your I know that you also studied film music, right, at one point, and I mean, so your listening range is huge.
Yeah, I try to listen to as much music as possible, and my teacher in my master's, Oscar Bettison, sort of gave his students this sort of practicing schedule or this idea of what practicing could be for composers, which is that you listen. Instrumentalists and performers, they practice their craft, but for composers, we listen. That's a very important part of what we do. So I try to listen to at least an hour of music that I haven't heard before every day from any genre. And so if there's something new that just came out that I want to listen to, then I'll sit down and listen to that. And I think that to a certain extent, everyone is sort of a summation of their influences, whatever they may be. So I feel that so long as I have a wide range of influences, then I'll be able to pick and choose what sorts of things I want to, focus on when I have a piece to write. And then, of course, there are always going to be the things that I don't choose to focus on. They're just sort of, the way I write. But, at least sometimes I can make active choices.
Yeah, and what was it like to work for the week with these musicians? I mean, is it helpful? How does it change your process, or does it?
Yeah, I think it's super helpful. Especially when it comes to trying things that you've never done before. This is my first time working with prepared piano, things like that. So it's really nice to have the feedback from the musicians say this work, this doesn't work. But there are also like small little things that I would never have thought of. For example, when I wrote the piece, I wrote it in 4/4 and it's very slow. And the ensemble suggested that I write it in cut time and then have the beat to the eighth note instead of the quarter note, and things like that that I would never have thought about, and it would have never occurred to me. But I think just psychologically for them, it really helped. And immediately, once they had the new score and parts, it just clicked in a way that it didn't before. So I think there are a lot of subtle things that you can pick up on if you're really paying attention in these rehearsals. And then, of course, there's the direct feedback that you get. And if you, as a composer, you can't grow nearly as quickly if you aren't hearing your music live and you grow a lot faster beyond that if you get to hear your music live and have the people who are playing it tell you this would make this better, or this would be a better way to get what you want to get out of the section. So it was an incredibly helpful week.
That's great. Well, so what's next for you? I know you're in Princeton, right? Or
Yeah. I'm working on a piece right now for Alarmal Sounds, which is a sinfonietta, and then a piece for Yarn Wire, which is 2 piano, 2 percussion. And I'm definitely going to take some of the ideas for prepared piano from this piece and apply it to that, and sort of see if I can make them as aggressive as possible right out of the gate. Just because I feel like if I have 2 pianos and 2 percussion, it would be a missed opportunity to not do that. So those are
yes,
the two
then you
big
don't have to
projects.
compare yourself to Bartok too. So
Yeah, exactly.
another better a good reason. Well, it was great. It was great having you at Cultivate,
It was my
and
pleasure.
yeah, and thanks for joining us for this. And I should say also thank you to I Care If You Listen, who's hosting this on their site, and the American Composers Forum, who's sponsoring it, as well as our faithful team at Copland House, Michael, Ian, and David, who are looking after everybody's needs. So, so thanks a lot,
Thank you.
and good luck with everything, Elijah.
Thanks, Derek. Have a good one.
All right.